Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Classroom Matters podcast with me, your host, Kristy Houle. And on today's episode, I am delighted to have a different kind of guest, but a very special guest when we talk about the world of education. And our guest today is Gary Hubb. Now, Gary, since 1999, has worked in both scripted and unscripted television and film as production coordinator, manager, and assistant director for multiple networks, including CBS, ABC, Fox, TNT, Discovery, History, National Geographic, and CNN. Gary has produced, written, and directed several films and documentaries that have earned him multiple film festival nominations and a special jury prize award. Currently, Gary is the managing partner for the new streaming video series service, historyfix.com. Sorry about that. It is a streaming video service, not a series. historyfix.com. We want to make sure and get that name out there. historyfix.com. Welcome, Gary. How are you?
Very good. Thank you. And thank you for having me come on board here. This is very, very exciting. And I'm very excited.
I'm so excited. So as I said in the intro, you're not the typical guest that we have, because normally on this podcast, we talk to teachers and principals and all things education in the world of K through 12 and homeschooling experts. But I thought that it was really unique to find someone like you, because I think that, in certain areas in education right now, we are lacking in specific content areas. And I think that history is one of those areas. And so I was really interested in having you on the show today and talk not only about historyfix.com, but the relevance to what you're doing and how we can start educating our students, K through 12, some students that start college early, homeschooling students in the area of history. So let's start by telling our audience a little bit about yourself, Gary, sort of what's your background and where did your passion for history come from?
That's a good question. My background comes from Pennsylvania, where I grew up. I grew up 30 minutes outside of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, where the biggest battle ever fought on the Western Hemisphere occurred in 1863, the American Civil War. The American Civil War, being so close to Gettysburg, I was just opened my eyes to the history within the area. I had elementary school teachers that talked a lot about the American Civil War, the Revolutionary War, George Washington, for a spell in actually York, Pennsylvania, where I grew up. Had the Continental Congress there for a short amount of time, and it became a capital for actually a very few short days in the Revolutionary War. I would gravitate to Gettysburg, and I was involved in local theater, just acting and doing all sorts of things. And at one point I figured, wow, I really like when this History Channel crew comes to Gettysburg and they're filming reenactors and they're, putting all these different battle, scenarios on screen. And there's all this production life that occurred in Gettysburg. So I would get myself involved. I would audition for roles. I would, say, hey, look, I would love to be an assistant of some sort. And they would put me behind the camera and I would do runs. And before long, I was able to combine my passion for movies and television and history itself. I, love the American Civil War. I love the Revolutionary War, just, being involved. And I found a new way of being influenced and educated, not by books, but also by historians, and putting on the uniform and having to be able to smell and taste and feel what it was potentially like. And that was that was my avenue into television and working then with the History Channel.
Mm-hmm. So, that's really interesting that you say that your interest sort of spawned from being in the middle of it, right? The reenacting and the putting on the uniforms and sort of feeling like you were in that moment in history. And, so I wanted to ask you next, and this is going to kind of lead into that, especially with what you just said about what your school experience, like elementary school, middle school, high school, did you have a lot of those experiences, or was it not until you got older that you had that in your school experience? So what was that like when you were in school with history? Was that something that you enjoyed?
I did. In elementary school, we had some really, really good teachers that we would go on field trips. They would take us to Gettysburg. We would go to a lot of different places and parks that the teachers would recognize. But actually, in high school, is where I felt that we were lectured more
Hmm.
than we were given or shown or taken to a place that would help influence us about history. Um, and maybe because I wanted it more, because uh, history was one of the topics, one of the subjects that I enjoyed in school. And once I graduated and was working at finding where's my avenue, where do I want to go in life, I went to college part time and worked full time, and I worked with folks that were um, mentally disabled. I worked at a group home and folks that were in physical and, and mental needs. So um, getting back to my education, I could tell that teachers perhaps maybe um, struggled, and now seeing, I think, as times change, education, um, it's hard to influence, I think, kids to get, maybe, if there's kids that just maybe do not care about education, or just that's not their subject that they most find intriguing. I definitely see that there is um, it's hard to influence children to
Yeah.
like something that they don't. And I think perhaps my angle would be to find a way to humanize a story, or find a way where the children could the students could be influenced in some way, where they can relate to
Yeah.
a subject from history.
I do remember a lot of lectures and dates and, maybe insignificant facts about people and places and things, and that really was missing.
Hmm.
How does this relate to my life? How does this, how does this apply to me, and what impact does this have on my world and those things? It seemed like it was missing.
Hmm.
And I don't know, I think they're doing a little bit better job in that, but that kind of leads me into historyfix.com. So let's talk about that a little bit, because that is this new endeavor that you have taken on, and it's a streaming service, and it's all things history. So talk to us a little bit about what is it, and how did this creation come to be?
This came, my managing partner, Will Eichler, and I worked on a number of documentaries for the last 20 years. We would, sporadically be hired. He's a photographer. I'm a, production manager, and I coordinated before that, and even production assistant, did a production assistant work before that. Um, Will and I both have uh, obviously a big interest in history through education and entertainment. You know, we both worked for the History Channel, and through the years, you find that shows like the History Channel kind of drive a different direction away from perhaps history, and are looking at reality based television. And the idea for History Fix is to fill that void that we
Mhm.
felt occurred, where we want to show students and history buffs and historians that this is a place, this is a community where folks can come, learn, be inspired, be influenced about historical figures and about stories that have not been discovered throughout our past. Um, so it's a it's a community of historians, history buffs alike, where we can all watch and be entertained and be influenced by new figures in history as well as old. And finding and when talking about um, figures of old like Abraham Lincoln, for instance, we're about taking off the top hat, revealing this guy that's on the $5 bill, but there's more about Abraham Lincoln that we don't know. And by finding ways to, like I was saying a little bit earlier, humanizing Abraham Lincoln and talking, perhaps, starting a discussion. Did you know that Abraham Lincoln was a wrestler and grappler, and he was 301 as a wrestler? And that perhaps might have a young mind listen. Oh, well, I'm a wrestler, or I'm in sports,
Yeah.
tell me more, and finding ways that allow um you know Abraham Lincoln to be interesting, and not just the same, man that we know with the beard and the top hat and giving the Gettysburg Address.
Yeah. I think that is so innovative and interesting, and being a former teacher and a principal and having three children that have been through the public school system, and I've homeschooled. I kind of wish this would have been around, like 10 years ago when I needed it, because I mean, I think when you said the word entertainment, you really are hitting on something there in one vein, because that is that's kids today, right? That's even young adults. You see these guys on the street with their microphones, if you're on social media or YouTube or TikTok, walking around and asking people, right, asking these young college age
Mm,
students or these high
mm,
school students history questions about when was the Civil War, who did we fight in this war, and they really a lot of times have no idea what he's even talking about,
right.
because this generation is so caught up in entertainment and reality that you putting that spin on history, what you said about Abraham Lincoln taking the top hat off, that is genius. Who he was as a person, and not just what he did, what we've learned through the history books. So if I'm a homeschool mom and a teacher or a principal and I go to historyfix.com, what kinds of things am I going to find on there?
On historyfix.com, educators and students will find all sorts of videos, perhaps about, let's take the American Revolutionary War. We will show a recipe that the soldiers or the civilians had in making a stew, and what resources they had back then, and finding ways that, this is actually something very simple and easy that you could make, and this is a meal that civilians and soldiers back then, men and women alike, would have been able to eat.
Mhm.
Or about a particular place, a destination, whether it be about a national park, and giving a little backstory about where they are, and what happened here, allows a sense of reality to a place. And it might be somewhere that's close to where the homeschool students can take a mini field trip or a day trip to go see, and it combines history through entertainment in that regard. A little bit of you know a travel moment, so that can be shared.
Yeah. And I think that's great. And I think it's coming at the perfect time with, I know that we're past the pandemic, but some students are still, virtual learning for whatever reasons, or they really need those online resources,
Hmm.
to really have those experiences. So I think the fact that historyfix.com is giving those resources to anyone that really wants them or is interested, is phenomenal. And so, let's talk more about some of the challenges that history teachers sometimes face, and why, kind of going back to us talking about how difficult it is sometimes to get young adults, young adolescents, children, K through 12 educators. What are some of the challenges you think that we're facing with teaching kids history in a way that they absorb it and retain it, and really it grabs a hold of them?
I think right now it's very difficult for educators because they're competing with social media and television, and even perhaps maybe in class. I'm not sure how cell phones work at certain ages in classrooms, in terms of what teachers allow and do not allow with the phones, but they are competing nonetheless, whether it be, um, you know, sharing information or providing uh, a backdrop to a story, when students can get a quick video or a quick glimpse of something on Instagram or TikTok, and they are competing with those minds. And I know that I'm sure it's very, very difficult. And I this I what I find that works with young minds is finding some sort of struggle with a historical character, or like somebody like Abraham Lincoln or George Washington, because kids obviously are struggling no matter what, whether being struggling with being bullied. I was a bullied kid myself, and talking about that, showing that being bullied, and that they can relate to somebody who was being bullied. Abraham Lincoln was being bullied as well as a child. and he learned to adapt and make, and do what he could, and maybe talking about something to that extent. So finding ways that the students may not feel they're being educated and being told a story, but we're slipping in information that is valuable to them,
Yeah.
that they can benefit from and take with them, and maybe find a way to be able to be um, helped out. Need that that big brother, that big sister
Hmm.
type element.
Yeah. Do you think sometimes teachers that teach history maybe I would think it would be really hard to teach history in today's world, especially with everything is so tumultuous, right? Over the
Hmm.
last 4 years and the last presidential elections and some of the things that have happened in the Middle East and some of the different wars that we've been involved in and differing of opinions. I
Hmm.
would think that it might be challenging for someone to teach history without a specific bias that comes with just being a human. So, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that that potentially is difficult for folks, and that holds them back sometimes?
Absolutely. It's depending on where I guess you are in the country, different educators will have probably some sort of bias, and um, I definitely feel that's important that teachers themselves could take a step back, because they're going to be dealing with students that come to class with their own influence, whether it be from their parents or their guardians and whatnot. Um, I had an educator that he um, he was a political teacher in our senior year, and one of the things that I found that he did so well is that he didn't involve his politics. We found out later that he was very, very far in one direction, and what was really unique about it, one of the students asked, he says, you're talking about either Democrats or Republicans. Uh, what side, what party, what side do you are you with? And he goes, and he was retiring that year, and he goes, in my, I forget, maybe 25, 30 years of teaching, he said, I have never been asked that question.
Hmm.
And thank you for asking that question, because I feel that I've given a non-biased approach to educating, especially with working in politics. He was, teaching us, everything we needed to know about, the inner workings of Washington D.C. And I just felt that very refreshing. That
Yeah.
having an instructor, a teacher that uh, did not give a biased approach to their
Hmm.
through education was very important for students. They could take away the information, process what from a teacher that was just giving a nice education.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree with you too. I think that's really important, because having three teenagers myself and them, coming home and talking about what their history teacher said or what their teacher said, sometimes it opens up discussions for us. And I think that unfortunately, because it is difficult to keep your own personal views out of that, I think that might be one of the reasons why you see more students being homeschooled,
Mm,
is because when these things are talked about in a public school setting, parents aren't necessarily thrilled with the fact that their child is being, sort of swayed one way or the other based on what their teacher's view of a historical event is or a specific character in history. Or, we've had controversy over Christopher Columbus, and
mm,
there's all kinds of things surrounding lots of different history characters now coming out, and that can be difficult when you're talking about what they're learning at home and what they're learning at school. So what are some things that you would say that we need to do more of in K through 12 homeschooling education, or things that maybe we need to stop doing when we're talking about teaching kids about history altogether? Like things we could do more of, things that maybe we need to stop doing, and maybe things we need to start doing. I mean, obviously, other than using historyfix.com in our classroom setting,
mm.
but some other items maybe.
That's an excellent question about what educators can do, stop doing, or uh, I guess what I would say is perhaps a little less of a straight lecture, and perhaps maybe a little bit more example driven of an of a program, or a way of recognizing um, uh, whatever subject they're talking about. I found that showing through example, whether it be bringing something something to school that day, bringing a couple, pieces of wardrobe, putting somebody in a wardrobe, talking, about that, pictures, things like that. A lot of my educators that I remember were ones who physically perhaps did something or took us, somewhere, or showed us and just walked us around outside the school and talked about whatever was important. And it allowed a sense of a foundation where we could then be influenced with whatever the topic was. I just feel that the short answer is maybe getting up and moving around a little bit more, and less lecture, less hands in the pockets or or arms crossed, kind of an approach.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Gary, thank you so much. Tell us where we can find you and History Fix, obviously historyfix.com, but is there a place on there where folks can reach out and touch base with you?
Yes, they can. We don't have an email platform, but we do have a community. Folks can, through whether it be our social medias, I would say the best location. We have a YouTube page that's called Stream History Fix, and as well as an Instagram page, and as well as on Facebook. So we can definitely get communication, if folks would love to reach out to us. Definitely, we'd love to hear from anyone that has questions, or perhaps maybe has suggestions on different shows or topics they would love to see more. So our Instagram and Facebook and YouTube page would be the best way to reach out to us, and that is Stream History Fix.
All right. Well, Gary Hubb, once again, historyfix.com. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I think this has been a great conversation to have. And as always, anyone listening can always get in touch with me at info@educate.today or at Kristy@educate.today if you are having a hard time getting in touch with Gary through his social media. And we will have all of this information listed on our description page. So Gary, thanks again for coming on the show. We really appreciate it. And this is Kristy Houle signing out for this episode of the Classroom Matters podcast. And as always, don't forget to check out all of our great resources on the educate.today website.